It really does not seem so long ago now that Microsoft's Windows Vista was the latest and greatest iteration of Microsoft's Windows operating system. But believe it or not, on January the 30th this year, Windows Vista turned 10 years old. So what's the story behind Windows Vista? How did Windows Vista become the benchmark of how bad an operating system can be in the eyes of some people, myself included, I must admit, regrettably? In this Video Sans Frontières video, I hope to tell the story of Windows Vista and, if we have time, demonstrate it. Windows Vista was originally code-named Longhorn, and development on it started in May 2001, 5 months before Windows XP was due to be released. It was originally supposed to be an incremental update between Windows XP and the new later OS from Microsoft, Blackcomb, which would have been a more major release. In 2002, however, Microsoft started the Trustworthy Computing Initiative, and Windows Longhorn development staff were retasked with making updates for Windows XP and later Windows Server 2003. After 2003's Summer of Worms, Microsoft decided to put the development of Longhorn on hold and work on Windows XP Service Pack 2 and Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 1. On August 26, 2004, it was announced internally to Microsoft employees that the Windows Longhorn development would be componentized from existing Windows Server 2003 source code, with the work starting in earnest from September 2004, and with the new series of builds starting from Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 1. So essentially what happened here is that development started from the ground up, once again on the new version of Windows, 3 years after it was originally started. In November 2004, after having considered many names for the final release, Microsoft went with Windows Vista. This was confirmed on July the 22nd, 2005. The first community technology preview of Windows Vista was released in July 2005 to beta testers, and subsequent CTPs were made available up until February 2006, when the development of Windows Vista was deemed feature complete. In May 2006, Windows Vista Beta 2 was made available to the general public through Microsoft's Consumer Preview program. 2 release candidates followed in September and October and was made available to a large number of users, me being one of them. Microsoft had originally hoped for Windows Vista to be available in time for Christmas 2006, but it was announced in March that the release date would be pushed back to January 2007 in order for the company as well as hardware and software developers to prepare. On November the 8th, 2006, Windows Vista was finalised, emerging with a build number of 6000 to coincide with its version number NT 6.0. Vista was made available to MSDN and TechNet Plus subscribers. Windows Vista Enterprise was made available to volume licensed customers on November the 30th, 2006, with the release to the general public being on January the 30th, 2007. So, let's have a look at the operating system. So this is the desktop of Windows Vista. Specifically, this is what most people would see upon starting Windows Vista. Now, if you've seen Windows XP's desktop before, you'll notice quite a few differences between that and the desktop of Windows Vista. Firstly, let's have a look at the actual window that's displayed on this screen. Notice that it is sort of translucent around the edges. That can be demonstrated further. Look, translucency in the start menu as well. That can be demonstrated further if I overlap another window against it. You can actually sort of see the window behind this other window that I've just opened. But not only that, let's have a look at the window itself. This is the Welcome Center for Microsoft Windows Vista. And I must admit, I do quite like it. It's you know, it's not annoying like older versions of Windows might have been. I hate to say this, but Windows 98, I'm looking squarely at you here with you know, the rock music and what have you. Yes, it might be good, and yes, you might like that tune, but that gets a bit wearisome when you're starting your computer. However, this is I think it's laid out just right, you know, to actually help you properly set up your machine. I mean, there's things on here now that you that really aren't available anymore. But it's kind of nice that you know, these things are still kind of on this window. Kind of reminds me of what times were like when Windows Vista actually came out. So let's have a wee look at everything that's on here. So first of all, you've got the version of Windows Vista you're running. In this case, this is Vista Ultimate. Then you have the CPU, which obviously this is a VM running on my desktop, so it's an i5. The amount of memory, that is where you would see the graphics card. In this case, it's VMware SVGA 3D, but it could quite easily say S3 Trio 64 or Singlabs ET4000. No, I'm kidding on. More likely say something like NVIDIA 7300GS. And then you've got your computer name. Now, what could you do with Windows Vista from the Welcome Center? Well, first of all, you could actually view the computer details. Yeah, as you can see, I completely forgot I did this. This is a Packard Bell Legend 822 CDT. Oh dear. And you'll also see this rating. Now, what is this? This was the Windows Experience Index. And apparently, I've not actually rerun this test since installing the VMware tools and Aero and what have you. But this was a version of Windows that introduced the Windows Experience Index. And it was supposed to be a number generated, well, based on the performance of the, let's be honest, slowest part in the system. So I could go in here, oh, okay, it's not going to be up to date in any way, shape or form. But each component would be tested, and you would actually be given a score for each component, and then the overall score would be the lowest performing item. In this case, it would have been the desktop performance for Windows Aero and 3D business and gaming graphics. If I was to run this test again, it would actually probably score a wee bit higher, because, you know, there's actually proper display drivers. It even says there, new hardware detected, your Windows experience needs to be refreshed. If I wanted to, I could actually go in and do that. And what that was then supposed to do was to give you an idea of whether or not your computer could run a certain program or game or what have you. That, I feel, was wholly inaccurate, because the overall Windows Experience Index score, like I said, was based upon the lowest. Now, this did make it over to Windows 7 and indeed Windows 8, but in Windows 8.1, the Windows Experience Index was dropped. You could view the computer details, transfer files and settings. I mean, that was something that came with Windows XP, Files and Transfer Wizard. And obviously this was the updated version to move anything over from an XP-based machine to a Vista-based machine. Not sure if it did support any earlier versions of Windows or not. And from the screen you could add a new user. And then there was the connect to the internet option. See, this machine is connected to the internet, so it's not going to run the internet connection wizard needlessly. But if I did want to set up a new connection, it would actually give me the option to set one up. You know, if depending on the hardware I had in here, I could set up a wireless connection, I could set up a dial-up connection, and yes, I did use Windows Vista with dial-up back in 2007, so that is definitely an option. I could also just, well, like, for example, now have it on a local area connection. But let's talk a bit about wireless. Windows Vista, its wireless capability was so much better than Windows XP's. You could also personalize Windows, register Windows online, and then you've got Media Center. Then there's Windows Basics, which basically has help files on how to use Windows Vista. And then there's something that I was very interested in.
Ease of Access Center. Make your computer easier to use. You can use the tools in this section to help you get started. Windows can read and scan this list automatically. Press the space bar to select the highlighted tool.
So this was the Windows Ease of Access Center.
Start magnifier.
And I'm going to shut this woman up. Now, while Windows Vista did not have a full screen magnifier, and you had to put up with this useless magnifying bar, it did have the Ease of Access Center, which would actually help you set up your computer properly for someone with disabilities. And if you weren't sure where to start, you could actually get recommendations to make your computer easier to use. So basically, you fill out this checkbox questionnaire on things that you might find difficult. You know, same as you might do with an assessment of needs for a university, for example. I mean, this is what I could liken this to. So let's say, for example, we're going through this. You know, you get statements to check, like, images and text on TV are difficult to see, even when I'm wearing glasses. Lighting conditions make it difficult for me to see the image on my monitor. I am blind. I have another type of impairment, even if glasses correct it. You know, and then you go through, and there's all different kinds of... it doesn't say necessarily that, doesn't ask you necessarily if you have a particular disability. It just says, what do you find difficult? I mean, this is the eyesight section, and it will kind of have sections. So, for example, I could say images and text on my TV are difficult to see. I have another type of impairment. And then the next screen is about dexterity. So I could, pens and pencils are difficult to use. A physical condition which affects the use of my arms, wrists, hands, or fingers. I do not use a keyboard. Hearing. Communication can be difficult to hear, even with a hearing aid. Background noises make my computer difficult to hear. I'm hard of hearing, or I am deaf. Speech. Other people have difficulty understanding me in a conversation, but not due to an accent. And I'm glad that they put that there, because they recognise that some people live in places that have a really difficult to understand accent. Like, for example, London. No, I'm kidding on. Or I have a speech impairment. Anyone from Birmingham might go and click that one, but I'm kidding on. And reasoning. I mean, I don't know how Windows Vista would help you in any of these, but you can tell I don't believe the results of this questionnaire get sent off to anyone. I mean, I used to be able to run it without being connected to the internet, so don't worry about that. reasoning. It's often difficult for me to concentrate. It's often difficult for me to remember things. I have a learning disability such as dyslexia. So now that I've filled this out, it's actually given me a screen full of choices that were actually that are actually tailored to my particular disability. So, for example, I could turn on the narrator or the magnifier, make the focus rectangle thicker. So that's basically if, you know, if a certain button or control has the focus, as in keyboard focus or interaction, I could make this rectangle thicker. Set the thickness of the blinking cursor. Turn on sticky keys. So, you know, if I had, you know, because I put certain, you know, dexterous things were difficult, it will allow me to, you know, it'll suggest things that I could do to make the machine easier to use. So if I had difficulty pressing, you know, multiple keystrokes, making multiple keystrokes like pressing Control Alt Delete, I could actually set the computer to do this one, do these things one at a time. And I know what you're saying. You know, you're probably shouting at your computer, but Jay, I could do these things on Windows XP. In fact, I could do these things on Windows 95. What the hell are you talking about, Windows Vista doing all this? Yes, that is true. All these options were available in Windows 95. Well, some of them are new to Windows Vista, like, for example, the thicker text cursor and making the focus rectangle thicker. But the way that the options are presented to you is different in Windows Vista. It's actually put a friendly face on things, and that is something that I like. And when paired with Windows 7's magnifier, I think Microsoft were really on the ball with accessibility. You know, once they had this and they had a full screen magnifier and all that good stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of options, you know, that I could select or deselect. So, for example, you know, if, you know, I say, because I said I get distracted, I'm pretty sure there's, you know, a way to turn off animations in Windows or what have you. Underline keyboard shortcuts, change the mouse pointer, activate a window by hovering over it with the mouse, turn on mouse keys, so I could use the keyboard to control the mouse cursor using the number pad. There we go. Turn off unnecessary animations when possible. Turn on audio description. Hear a description of what's happening on videos when available. Remove background images. And have a keystroke that turns on high contrast. So this is very good. I mean, obviously, if you just want to set the accessibility settings manually, you don't have to go through that, and you know, basically just go through any one of these options, and change administrative settings so that you can actually make an accessibility file that you could deploy on any computer, and when double clicked on, it will actually reset the machine to do what you ask of it. Which, you know, even if the machine has got restricted permissions. At least that's the way it's been in 2000 and XP. I've never really tried it on Vista or 7. One thing that I did like, that it kind of showed that the Web 2.0 initiative was becoming a thing, was Windows Vista demos. So you could... oh look, demos learning to use the mouse. This one goes out to Road Geek. If you think it's amusing that people were learning to use a mouse in 2006, in 1995, sorry, then in 2006, 2007, Windows Vista gave you that very same option of taking a lesson on using the mouse. Which I guess, well, thinking about it, this is a Packard Bell Legend 822, so I guess it's appropriate. So, I wonder if these demos are still around. I guess I could find out. Did they come on the Windows Vista disk? Oh, look!
To get the most out of your software programs, you should know how to find, start, install, and remove them from your computer. The Start menu is the best way to find programs on your computer. Programs
and don't you forget it, Microsoft, the Start menu is the best way to find stuff on my computer. And then we have the control panel. Now, the second part of the Welcome Center is kind of more of a promotional thing. So, for example, you know, you had learn about Windows Live. I'll give you a hint. It doesn't exist anymore. Go online to find it fast with Windows Live. And here's something that's a blast from the past. Go online to help protect your PC with Windows Live. And this icon, some of you might remember, was the short-lived Microsoft OneCare security software, which also included antivirus. You know, that was around for a wee bit, but was stopped pretty soon afterwards. But it kind of lives on in Windows Security Essentials. You also could go online to the Windows Marketplace, where I guess you could buy software programs and hardware, maybe, I can't remember. Go online to connect and share with Windows Live. So that's Windows Live Messenger. And in fact, if you go into the Start menu, Windows Live Messenger download was available. I'll give you a hint, it isn't anymore. Go online to find more ways to help protect your PC. And then sign up for online for technical support. So Microsoft Windows Vista, right from the start, wanted you to know that there was all kinds of stuff that you could do with your computer, and it was available right from the Welcome Center, right when you started up your machine. So if we have a look at some of the programs in Windows Vista, I mean, you'll see that some programs got quite an overhaul. This is Media Player 11. In Windows XP, all this area was black. In Windows Vista, all this is transparent, as long as you have Aero. If not, it just kind of turns a, you know, quite jarring shade of kind of baby blue, which is a bit of a shame. And if I choose to have you know, other programs, Windows Photo Gallery, for example, this was quite good in that I, you know, always was quite interested in photography, and when Windows Vista came out with this program, I was really quite happy about that, because it was a very simple way to organize photographs, and it actually had options for sharing. Actually, this version didn't, but they did come out with a version. Well, actually, no, this didn't have share with devices. But Microsoft then backported this to Windows XP with the Windows Live Photo Gallery and the Windows Live Movie Maker, which were basically improved versions of those programs that were in Windows Vista. For Home Premium and Ultimate, you got the Windows DVD Maker and the Windows Vista Media Center. And my goodness, that's a lot of Windows. What if I wanted to have a look at what they were all displaying at the one time? Well, if I was on a Mac, I could bring up the expose. On Windows Vista, things were slightly different. Aero Flip 3D. And this was touted with quite some fanfare. But you could only get it if you had a graphics card capable of Windows Aero. If not, you'd just get the standard Alt-Tab menu. But even the Alt-Tab menu in Vista was different. This was the first version that would actually show you a window preview of of the windows that you had open. And as well, if you hovered over the taskbar buttons, you actually get wee previews there. So I mean, some people might think that this was extraneous eye candy that used up CPU cycles and wasn't needed, and those people would be right. But it certainly helps to make your computing life that bit better. You know, you could actually see what window is displaying what and then just kind of go straight to it. And the look and the feel of Windows Vista. I love the whole Aurora thing that they had going. I mean, look at the default desktop background. It was all kind of nice and, you know, teal and what have you. And one of the things that I did like about Vista was that, you know, on a normal window you'd have kind of a clear edge around the window. But when you maximized it, the title bar would actually turn a very, very dark kind of muted teal colour. And it almost kind of looked like, to me like the desktop could be behind there, but I mean, it was basically just the design of the window that had been darkened. But I liked that as well, and the taskbar would turn black. I mean, Windows 7, by comparison, yes, Windows 7 still has Aero, and yes, I do like Windows 7, but it does look a bit odd with the clear taskbar and on a maximized window. It just, yeah. And clear title bar on a maximized window as well. Whereas Windows Vista would actually hide the desktop away. It's almost as if it knows that you're dealing with a maximized window, you mean business, you really don't need to be distracted. So what else did Vista have? You had the sidebar. I mean, these widgets became desktop widgets in Windows 7 and are now unsupported by Microsoft. But back in the Windows Vista heyday, there was quite some gadgets that you could get. For example, I remember that the Railway Inquiries website actually had such a gadget that would actually sit on the sidebar, and you could input details of a train journey that you would often take, and it would actually display it. You know, the next trains out of the station that were going to that destination. So, for example, I could have trains from Aberdeen to Edinburgh, and it would actually tell me, you know, the next few trains that are actually going to be leaving from Aberdeen and going to Edinburgh. So, I mean, that was, again, not necessarily essential, but certainly quite useful. And Windows Vista's games got quite an overhaul as well. In fact, Windows Vista was the first place that we would see, yay, Purple Place! And the pre-existing games were all given quite nice animations and what have you. You know, and this is still kind of evident today in the newer versions of Solitaire and what have you. Just a shame that a lot of the other games didn't make it. I must admit, I did quite like the idea of if Purple Place were on a touchscreen machine. I think Microsoft definitely missed a trick there. And then, of course, you had Inkball, so that was more for tablet computers. And then you had newer versions of Free Cell, Solitaire, and Hearts, and Minesweeper. And then, as well as Spider Solitaire, and then you also had a chess game for the first time in Windows. So that is Windows Vista. I mean, there's all kinds of features that I could go on and speak about, and I guess I've missed out quite a lot. But one last feature that I would like to talk about is the searching from the start menu. Yes, indexing files did crunch a lot of hard drives, and they did so in such a way that, you know, hard drives would actually be dying prematurely because there was that much read and write activity to the drives. And really it was, you know, a bit needless, but the indexing capability of Vista, once you'd actually let it run, was pretty good. You could just, go to the start menu, type something, and it would appear, like a document, a program, all that kind of stuff. Yes, this is still available in Windows today, but Windows Vista was the first version of Windows to actually have it. In fact, we can thank Windows Vista for a lot of the modern things that we take for granted, like Windows Search, and things like that. But yeah, so that is Windows Vista. So that is Microsoft's Windows Vista operating system in the flesh. And while it did have quite a few problems, as I will discuss in a minute or two, overall, on the right system, it could be a fantastic feature-rich operating system. And that is why I personally struggled and persevered with it between it and Windows 7's release in October 2009. So about those problems then, let's explore those in more detail. In early 2007, when Vista was first released, there were two major issues with the operating system, at least as far as I can tell. The first one was the high system requirements. I mean, sure, Microsoft said it would run on an 800 MHz CPU with 512 megs of RAM, but woe betide the person to try it. And sure, the recommended specs did say that a Vista Premium Ready PC could have as low as a 1 GHz CPU with a gig of RAM, as well as the GPU with 128 megs of VRAM. However, there were a great many computers that exceeded the system requirements for Windows Vista by quite a way, but for some reason could not seem to run it efficiently. In my personal experience, my 2006 custom build was a mid-range machine, albeit with a budget graphics card, that could pretty much take everything I threw at it, and I did throw quite a bit at it. I mean, I used that system for anything from doing studying to playing the odd occasional game, and yes, at the time I did play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which at the time was just newly released for the PC. And I also did a lot of transferring of content from VHS to DVD with that system. And, it basically just took it all with good nature and aplomb. I had absolutely no problems with that system while it was running at XP. It had an 8-bit UL8 motherboard with a ULI M1689 chipset, on which was installed an AMD Athlon 64-3200 Plus Venice chip running at 2.04 GHz, along with 1.25 gigs of RAM. At the time I'd upgraded to Vista at least. The graphics were driven by, and this is fatal mistake number one, an ATI Radeon 9250. And while the machine screamed along with Windows XP, and when I say it screamed along, I mean it screamed like, basically like someone in an anime is having a very jolly, happy, joy, good time.
It's time to stop!
It could barely run Windows Vista. I'd had more chance of running Aero on an old toaster than that Radeon 9250. A-Bit refused to relieve Windows Vista drivers for the UL8 board because I think they are a skit, and my Pinnacle PC TV stereo and Tevion digital tuner no longer wanted to do much of anything TV related after the upgrade. But with the preponderance of reality TV shows at the time like Big Brother and X Factor and Britain's Got No Talent, who can blame them? This brings me on to the second problem with Windows Vista. Due to the haphazard nature of its development, a lot of original equipment manufacturers and software development houses decided to hold off releasing updated drivers and patches for Windows Vista. In some cases, some software and devices were not updated to work with Windows Vista until around a year after its release. Some programs were not patched to work with Windows Vista at all. What these software houses did instead was to release a new paid update that included Windows Vista compatibility. One such company to do this was AI Squared, the makers of ZoomText, which is a screen magnifier. You've probably seen it running on some of my machines in the past. I'd received a copy of ZoomText 9.0 in December 2006, along with the Ergo Ansys and a few other devices to help me with my university studies. When I came to upgrade to Windows Vista, however, in January 2007, I found that ZoomText 9.0 did not work. What was more was that there was no update available for ZoomText at the time. We had to wait until April 2007 for that, 2 to 3 months after Windows Vista's release. To add yet further insult to injury, in order to qualify for the discount on the new update, which again, I must remind you, is paid, called ZoomText 9.1, you had to have purchased ZoomText 9.0 no earlier than February 2007. So that actually counted me out for an update discount. If you had a Vista machine you bought on day one, you'd have had to have actually went out and bought a screen magnification package that was completely incompatible with the operating system that you were running before you could actually be eligible for an update, a paid update to 9.1. Did I mention that you actually had to pay for this update? I just wanted to make sure. Guess could be the thing to take away from this particular part of the video. You had to pay for ZoomText. Overall, a lot of people were unhappy that upgrading their computers to Windows Vista, their once mid-range computers that were capable of performing a variety of tasks, suddenly became extremely expensive email machines. Some computers that were less than a year old became completely unusable with Windows Vista. In my experience, Windows Vista only really played well with computers were at the then cutting edge of technology. So for example, if you were speccing up a machine to run Vista, you'd want a dual-core processor and at the minimum 2 gigs of RAM, as well as a DirectX 9 capable graphics card to be able to run Aero. That said, I have actually seen Vista run pretty well on computers powered by, say, something like a hyper-threaded Prescott-based Pentium 4. And speaking of the cost of all this, the new components you needed to buy to be able to actually run Windows Vista on your, let's be honest, brand new machine, you also had to account for the price of Windows Vista. Now, the most basic version of Windows Vista, Home Basic, if you're running the 32-bit version of that, I've never really thought that there was a reason to use that in place of Windows XP. But then, that was just me. But let's say you did want to run Windows Vista Basic. In the United States it cost $100. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Upgrade copy of the consumer version of Windows, $100. That does seem quite reasonable. However, once it came over to this side of the pond, what Microsoft did was to simply replace the dollar sign with the pound sign, as in the British pound. And at the time, Brexit was basically only a dream in the most maniacal of super right-wing Egypt. So the pound was particularly strong at this time. In fact, it was literally, you could literally get $2 American for your £1 sterling. So essentially what happened was that we were paying double for Windows Vista to what America was paying. And what's more, there was actually more special offers in America. You could actually get the family pack of Windows Vista, which included a copy of Vista Ultimate and a couple of copies, I believe, of Vista Home Premium. You know, and that was actually not bad value. Was it available over in the UK? No, it wasn't. Now, when challenged on this, Microsoft did say something about shipping and taxation and all that good stuff, but sorry, I'm not buying it, lads. If it's $100 in America, then it should be the equivalent over here. I guess the good news is now that the pound is so weak that they could actually get away with doing that. Anyway, back to the computers needed to run Vista. Even after upgrading my 2006 custom built with an NVIDIA GeForce FX 5200 and upgrading the RAM as far as I could only upgrade it to 1.75 gigs because that's all I could afford. I was a student at the time. I still found that Windows Vista was sluggish, so I eventually had to build a new machine. I mean, it didn't help that my 2006 custom built actually up and died, but that's not what I'm complaining about here. So, I did actually have to build a new machine. So I did, and it featured an Intel Core 2 Duo E6400, a gigabyte of DDR2 RAM, which I must admit was swiftly upgraded to 2 gigs, an NVIDIA GeForce 7300 GS, and before you start writing me a bag of comments, I was only a student, so I wanted something that could reasonably display Aero, but really couldn't afford anything with the super duper SLI blooming 98,867,636 GTX TI WRC VSpec Type R Scaglietti GTO 288 Pontiac Ferrari Lamborghini edition. So I had to stick with the lowly 7300 GS, and that did work. And I upgraded to a bigger hard drive, 320 gigs to be exact, threw in a new power supply in a case, and salvaged the optical drives and my data drive from my 2006 custom build. Once I'd actually put this machine together, I found that Vista ran so much better. With that, over the next couple of years, Microsoft did do what they could to fix a lot of Windows Vista's issues. And the operating system did receive 2 service packs. One thing that really stands out to me at this point was Service Pack 1, which actually made the file copying process run a lot more smooth on Vista, because when Vista RTM'd, it suddenly took ages to do a simple file copy. It just took so much longer than XP, and there was no good reason for that. Unfortunately, Microsoft Windows Vista received such a poor reputation at its initial release, funnily enough, that Microsoft decided to perform a marketing exercise called the Windows Mojave Experiment. Well, what was the Windows Mojave Experiment, Jay? I hear you ask. Well, let me tell you. The Windows Mojave Experiment was an advertising campaign for Windows Vista. Participants of the experiment were asked about their perceptions of Vista, were then shown a 10-minute demo of Microsoft's so-called Next operating system, codenamed Mojave. After the experiment was over, it was revealed that Mojave was actually just Windows Vista. As a result, the average rating of Vista was 4.4 out of 10, but the average rating for the Mojave OS was 8.5 out of 10. The official goal of the Mojave experiment was to get consumers to decide for themselves, rather than to accept the community-held negative perceptions of Windows Vista. I mean, Windows Mojave was just a rebranded version of Windows Vista, with the Vista branding having been replaced in order to prevent any preconceived biases. And if you think the experiment was a bit of a dirty move on Microsoft's part, well, you're not alone. I did. As did GadgetZone.com. It was criticised for cherry-picking positive statements and not addressing all of the aspects of Vista. The necessary hardware and software, for example, had already been set up for the participants, and no doubt that will have been cherry-picked by Microsoft for optimum performance. And it was demonstrated by a salesman. So the users were unable to try out the software for themselves. The criticism from the blogosphere was echoed in the New York Times. On October the 23rd, 2009, Windows Vista was succeeded by Windows 7, which had a much better overall reception. In fact, Windows Vista's reception was so poor that a lot of businesses did actually decide to skip out Windows Vista altogether. Yes, there were some companies that did actually deploy Vista on their machines, but I certainly know that a lot of businesses and schools and colleges and what have you chose to stick with XP. Windows 7, however, did have a much better overall reception. Most computers that ran Windows Vista would have no problems running Windows 7, and in some cases the machines would run Windows 7 a lot better than they had done Windows Vista. And I've experienced this for myself. Windows Vista has continued to receive updates over the years until the mainstream support ended in 2012, in which it only then started to receive security fixes. Windows Vista is set to reach the end of its extended support period on April the 11th, 2017, and will follow Windows XP to that great retirement home in the sky for old Windows versions. And that was the story of Microsoft Windows Vista. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to click on the links to subscribe to the channel, to like videos on Frontier on Facebook, and to follow me on Twitter. But for the meantime, please do feel free to join me for my next video.